Hello, welcome to the Comics and More podcast. I'm Dave Ferraro from Comics and More.
And I'm Patrick Markfort from Articulate Nerd. And this week I am so excited about this episode of the Comics and More podcast because we're going to be talking about two of my absolute all-time favorite cartoonists, Gilbert Hernandez and his brother Jaime Hernandez, who of course are the creators of the long-running Love and Rockets comic book series. So, super briefly, for those few who may not be familiar with their work at all, Jaime Hernandez and Gilbert Hernandez created the comic book series Love and Rockets back in the 1980s. Self-published the first issue that was later picked up by Fantagraphics, and they have been the publishers ever since. It's essentially an anthology where each of the brothers do their own stories in every issue. And it has been running more or less consistently since its original publication in the 1980s across a variety of formats. And the current incarnation of the Love and Rockets comic book is an annual series of short graphic novels. So they release one of these books now under the Love and Rockets banner every year. And it is the fourth issue of that incarnation of Love and Rockets, which has recently been released, that we're going to be taking a look at on this week's episode. We're also going to be reviewing a recent solo effort from Gilbert Hernandez, his graphic novel, Love from the Shadows. So, let's get right into our review of Love and Rockets New Stories, number 4. This is the cover of that issue. Kind of a great Halloween-esque image. And that cover is by Gilbert Hernandez. The brothers switch off every issue. So it was Gilbert's turn to do the cover for this one. So, the stories in this issue consist, on Jaime's side, of the final 3 chapters of a serial that he began last year in Love and Rockets New Stories number 3 called The Love Bunglers. And he also has a story in here called Return to Me. So, The Love Bunglers is essentially a story about Maggie, who, as Love and Rockets fans know, is Jaime's long-running character. She has more or less been the protagonist of Jaime's stories since the very beginning of Love and Rockets, and we've kind of followed her evolution from a very young 20-something kind of punk in the 1980s into kind of middle age, and in this issue beyond. So we've been following that character and her story for a long time. It's also the story of Ray Dominguez, who Jaime created, again, some time ago as kind of a male counterpart to Maggie. They had a relationship at one point. They had lived together as boyfriend and girlfriend, and have since been estranged, but they've always had kind of an on-again, off-again kind of chemistry. And the final parts of the Love Bunglers that we get in this issue really kind of are the culmination and kind of a conclusion of the Maggie-Ray relationship. So we have Maggie at a point in her life where she is contemplating opening up her own garage because she has skills as a mechanic. And Ray is currently teaching an art class, and there's a lot of other stuff going on with a lot of other characters. Most notably, Maggie's estranged brother, Calvin, who was featured for the first time, we had never seen the character before, in a pretty much universally acclaimed short story in the previous issue of Love and Rockets called Browntown, which is a phenomenal work of comics art, if you have not read that. So Calvin is involved in this story as well. It's kind of tough reviewing this because I don't want to say too much about it. But essentially the story consists of Maggie and Ray kind of getting to a point in their lives where they may be getting to the point where maybe they'll be getting back together. Until at the conclusion of the story, there is a tragic, violent incident. And it's shocking. And after that incident, we cut to, first of all, a 2-page spread that consists of 9 panels each on each page. One page features Maggie at various points throughout her life, throughout the series. The other page features Ray at various points throughout his life, throughout the series. And for long-running fans of Jaime's work, these 2 pages pack such an emotional wallop. I mean, I have read all of the previous issues of Love and Rockets. I remember all of these previous points that were referenced on this 2-page spread. And it's deceptively simple the way Jaime Hernandez has laid out these pages. I mean, he's a master cartoonist. You know, he makes this stuff look easy. But the structure of these 2 pages and what it conveys about the history of each of those characters individually, their relationship to each other, coming as it does after this tragic, violent encounter in which we do not know what the fate of one of these characters is going to be. Frankly, it was incredibly moving to me, very much so. After that 2-page sequence, we flash forward in time farther than Hernandez has ever gone with Maggie and her supporting cast. The cast more or less has aged in real time as the comic book has been running. So now we jump ahead to see Maggie quite a few years later in her life. And Hernandez here provides, as I said, basically a kind of ending of sorts, a conclusion to Maggie's story, to Ray's story, or at least the story of them together. So I'm sure that there will continue to be Maggie stories. I have no doubt about that. I don't think this is actually going to be the last Maggie story, but I think Jaime Hernandez wrote it so that it could be the last story about Maggie and Ray and Hopi, long-running kind of partner to Maggie, friend, sometimes lover. She gets a nice little conclusion here as well. Honestly, I can't say enough good things about Jaime Hernandez's work in this book. A lot of people have already been praising it elsewhere. Love and Rockets New Stories number 3, it was my number one. Jaime's work in that issue was my number one pick for best comic of last year. It amazed me that this deep into his career, which is a career filled with high points, Jaime Hernandez is responsible. I know I'm going on and on. I'm going to wrap it up. But for some of the best comics and graphic novels in the industry. So for him to hit such a high point in issue number 3 at this point in his career when he could be resting on his laurels was extraordinary. So Love and Rockets number 3, amazing. So he had a lot to live up to here for number 4. So for him to set the challenge for himself to I feel he tried to top that issue by wrapping up all the themes of really his kind of half of Love and Rockets, because Maggie and Ray were at the heart of that, and providing such an emotionally affecting, satisfying ending to these stories. It was absolutely extraordinary. Jaime's work in this issue is better than I think anything that we've reviewed in this podcast put together. I would trade the entirety of DC 52 for that two-page spread that I described. Okay. So, all right, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to let Dave talk really soon. Briefly, the other story that Jaime has in this issue, which is connected to the Love Bunglers in the way that Browntown was connected to the first chapters of the Love Bunglers in Love and Rockets New Stories number 3, Return to Me. This is a story where we see a short story from the point of view of Maggie's childhood best friend who we've heard about before, we've seen a little bit in flashbacks, and who, as fans of Love and Rockets know, was tragically killed in a senseless car accident. So we see that period leading up to that accident, and indeed we see the accident for the first time here in a little flashback. And I think putting that story in this issue comments thematically on what's going on in Maggie's present-day life, and we can talk a little bit about that later, maybe. Because I want to get to Gilbert stories. So
maybe we should break this up a little bit.
Do you want to break it up? Am I talking too much? All right.
I mean, this is going to be like a 15-minute monologue.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I knew this was going to be a danger if we talked about Love and Rockets. I mean, I'm really not capable of objectively reviewing this stuff. But, all right, well, let's pause. Let's hold off on the Gilbert work in this issue. And, sorry. We'll talk about Jaime Hernandez in a little bit more depth. So what was your take on Jaime Hernandez's work in Love and Rockets #4?
Well, I come from a very different place than you do. You've been following his work for years now through Love and Rockets, different incarnations.
Yeah, I
think
wasn't
starting with Volume 2, right?
Yeah, I wasn't. I was not a Love. I mean, I was an infant. I was not a Love and Rockets fan from the beginning. I mean, I came into it relatively late in the game when they were beginning to publish the second volume of Love and Rockets. So I started reading that, and then I got caught up on the first volume in trade paperback.
Which has still been about 10 years.
Yeah,
I've been following it. So
yeah.
But I've read Gilbert stuff. I've actually read his stuff within the last 5 years, but I have not actually gone back and read all of Jaime's stuff yet. Kind of an embarrassing gap in my comic knowledge.
Okay, there's a lot.
I have read some of his later stuff. I did read Ghost of Hoppers. I've read his work in the new Love and Rockets material. But I just have not gone back through, beginning with Maggie, Mechanic, and going forward.
You haven't read everything.
I haven't read everything.
I've read
Death of Speedy and that stuff. So, obviously, like you mentioned, that spread of the 9 panels, kind of highlighting their lives. I didn't get the emotional wall up that you did because I hadn't experienced those necessarily. But it was a very emotional story nonetheless.
Yeah.
I did definitely tear up at the end. It was the very end, the last story that kind of wraps up Maggie's life it's very touching. And Jaime has this way of just kind of immersing you in this world. It's not like it's anything like superhero books like way over the top or whatever. It's very very much it is mundane, but it's almost like being with your friends, kind of. You know what I mean? It's just you're just immersed in this world, and it's just
and you
really feel it.
Yep, and there's a sense that these characters have a life beyond the pages and the panels that you're seeing, and there's that accumulation of the history that Jaime Hernandez has built up that you can feel in those pages, even if you yourself may not have read every single page of it. He conveys the sense that these are real people with a real past and a real history together.
You can't get more three-dimensional than the characters he puts on the page here.
Right, and he does it through deceptively simple artwork. His line work could not be cleaner, simpler. He does not do experimental odd-shaped panels or any kind of trickery. It is the simplest looking, most pared down, beautiful looking cartoon you can imagine, and it just conveys surprising depths of emotion.
And Gilbert does the same thing with Palomar, and especially I think the Luba stories later on are just really emotionally impactful. But they both kind of have that same kind of ability to just I don't know, just get inside you a little bit. You know what I